providing the nice drinks and things. Also, if you haven't signed up, please remember to sign up. It helps pay for the pizza. So with that, I'd like to invite Jay Prasad, who worked at Micrel with Ray, to introduce Ray.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure and actually a real honor to introduce Ray Zinn. I worked at Micrel for 6 years, and actually Sandeep gave me a piece of paper to read this. I said I'll first talk and then maybe read the stuff. Okay, like if you want to introduce your father, you don't sit and read a paper. Okay. So what is interesting about Ray is that remember in the universities when you studied, when you talk to the professor, you have a respect for the professor. So you have a respect for him, right? So you talk to him with a certain degree. So certainly whenever you talk to him in one-on-one, you have that feeling. But there's another feeling also. When you go to a church and you go to see the pastor, and then you have different kind of respect. And with Ray, when you work with Ray, you get a mixture of both, a leadership, a professorship, a mentorship, and also like a priest-like attitude. Okay, so he teaches you all the aspects of life that you have to go through in life and how to manage it, and it touches your very heart. That's the most important thing. You're just not an employee, but you're a part of a family. And you don't get this kind of feeling in any other company. I can tell you, I worked for so many years, 36, 37 years in the industry right now. You can see my gray hair. Okay, but you'll never get that feeling. And also treats everybody with respect, including starting from an operator, technician, all the way up to the VPs. Everybody is treated with equal respect. I'm just talking, extempore, so I'm not prepared anything because suddenly Sandeep said introduce because you worked there. Okay. So I don't know how to express my gratitude to him. I learned a lot of things from him from management because you can read about management books. I've attended many management courses because project management courses they teach you in the universities, right? Not also in the companies also send you for that. They're all very bookish. What you learn is the real thing, okay? How to handle situations. I was a senior director of R&D at Micrel. I had a whole bunch of people to handle, and he taught me how to handle people issues, which you'd never learn. You have to really practice. So I learned a lot of things from him. Now what I'll do is I'll formally read this paper, okay? Raymond Zinn, as an inventor, entrepreneur, and the longest-serving CEO of a publicly traded company in the Silicon Valley, he is best known for creating and selling the first wafer stepper, an industry-standard piece of semiconductor manufacturing equipment, and also co-founding a semiconductor company, Micrel, acquired by Microchip in 2015. Which provides essential components for smartphones, consumer electronics, and enterprise networks. He served as a chief executive officer, chairman of its board of directors, and president since Micrel's inception in 1978 until his retirement in 2015. It's a great achievement. Zinn's philosophy on people, servant leadership, humanistic management, and ethics of corporate culture are credited with Micrel's nearly unbroken profitability. Zinn also holds 20 patents for semiconductor design. A proud great-grandfather, he is actively retired and mentoring entrepreneurs. His new book, Tough Things First, from Micrel, is available through toughthingsfirst.com, Amazon, and other fine booksellers. In addition, review copies are also available on request. So now, please welcome Ray Zinn for this wonderful talk, which will be very inspiring and motivating talk for all of you.
Thanks, Prasad. So how do I advance? So what's the red button here? Where's the advance button? The advance, to advance the slides? I didn't get a driver's lessons on how to advance yet. Okay. Okay, so So thanks, Prasad, for that glowing introduction. You know, when I was asked by Sandeep to speak at the IEEE meeting tonight, it was on my bucket list. It was one of the things I wanted to do, have wanted to do since I started in the industry, you know, back in the early 60s. And so I never thought I'd get a chance to speak at an IEEE because once I became the CEO of Micrel, it seemed like you mainly invited engineers to come and talk because your meetings are more intellectual or technical in nature, and I never thought I'd have a chance to come and visit and actually tell you about the industry in general. So my talk tonight is going to be around the industry and what I've learned as a consequence of being in the industry for 53 years. And probably, as I reflect back now that Andy Grove has passed away, I think I'm the oldest surviving member of the industry in the world today. So if you think Prasad's got gray hair, mine must be really gray because I've been here almost twice as long as Prasad has. So again, I'm the oldest of 11 children. You know, born and raised in Southern California on a cattle ranch. Didn't know what a semiconductor was in those days because in that period of time we were just in vacuum tubes, as you would. So when I graduated in 1960, the BS in engineering, I came to the San Jose area and started out working at United Technology designing rocket motors. And my father-in-law, I should introduce my family. My wife is here. This is my wife, stand up, Delana. This is my wife of almost 55 years. We have 4 children and 22 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. So we're off to a good start. I'd like to introduce my son, David. David, stand up. This is my son, David. David followed in his dad's footsteps and joined the industry in, what, 1995? And now works at TI. So after my company was sold, then David left and joined Texas Instruments. Well, I'm very proud of him, what he's accomplished. He worked in process development when he was at Micrel, so I was very happy to have him work with me and my other son, Michael, who, by the way, is still looking for a job. If anybody's looking for a layout designer, Michael's looking for work, so I put that as a commercial. Anyway, so growing up in the agricultural industry and then coming to Silicon Valley was a real eye-opener for me. Where I grew up was very hot. You know, the temperatures were over 100. And all I knew is I didn't want to work outside anymore. So I wanted to find a job that could work inside, but I found out how technical it was. As I said, I started out, first of all, designing rocket motors. And then Delana's father, my wife's father, worked at Fairchild as a lab technician. And so he taught me into joining Fairchild in 1963. And I moved around a little bit, a couple of companies, and then ultimately ended up at Electromask in 1973, I think it was, or 74. Electromask designed and manufactured photomask equipment. In fact, the equipment, the mask making department you have here at TI, or I don't know if it's still here, but I helped put the first piece of equipment in here in the mask making area at National in those days. And so I worked at at Electromask for 4 or 5 years and then left and started Micrel. So just a little bit about that. So what happened was that my boss, after coming up with the idea of the wafer stepper, which I'm going to talk about later on in my talk, said you really shouldn't work for a company. You're too aggressive. You're too out of the box. You know, you're too entrepreneurial. You should just work for yourself. So I left Woodland Hills that evening and flew home to San Jose and walked in the house and told my wife that I was never going to work for anybody ever again, that I was going to start my own company. That was in July of 1976. So I wasn't known. Nobody really knew me. Hadn't made my mark yet in the industry. And so it was difficult for me to go out and get venture capital money, which I didn't want to do anyway, but you know, the die was cast in that respect. I couldn't get venture capital because I didn't have a product. I just wanted to start a company and then develop the company with good people in it, and then develop the products after a while. So for the first few years, we acted as a test services company, and I used to do a lot of the wafer sorting and package testing for National, which is now TI. In fact, they were my first customer. Was National, and we had this little building over on very close by here on Midas Way. For those of you who ever heard of Midas Way, it's just down the street here from you guys. And we had a little test facility that we put together. Because what I did is I gathered together some money, $300,000, and thereafter went to the bank to see if I could get a loan. And of course, the bank said, we don't loan to startups. And I said, well, draft up a document that would indicate what requirements you would have to bankroll or to fund a startup. And they said, well, we're not going to do that. That's not possible. And I said, well, just help me out, give me an education as to why a bank will not loan to a startup. And so that was in 1977, roughly, or middle of 78. And so they humored me, and they drafted up this document that described the covenants and conditions I'd have to meet if the bank were to fund us. And so I was asking for $300,000, and that was enough for me to buy another piece of test equipment that I needed. And so the bank showed me the document, and I just signed it. I said, okay, I agree to this. And I shoved it back at them. And they said, well, wait a minute. We weren't intending to finance you. I said, well, you did. I'm already signed it. This is a legal document, and I signed it. And they turned to each other and said, we've been had. And the bank at that time was called First National Bank of San Jose, which ultimately became Bank of the West. So I was the first startup that the bank had ever funded. So there's a lot of firsts for me. I conned them into financing me, basically what I did. But I got the money. But the requirement was that I had to be profitable every single year. And that's difficult to do in the semiconductor business. So has anybody here ever worked for Maxim or LTC in the room? Nobody? Okay, yeah. So Maxim and LTC started about the same time I did. They started in 80 and 81. And I started in 78. And so they raised $20 million, 20 and 21. One of them raised 21, the other raised $20 million. The average investment for a semiconductor company at that time was around $50 million. And that's, to this day, I think it's somewhere in that 50 to 100 million, I think, is the average funding of a startup company in semiconductors. But I did it with $300,000. And so they thought I was crazy. In fact, I asked a friend of mine who used to work here at National. His name is Bob Welton. I asked him what he thought, and he says, you're going to fail. You just won't. You can't possibly do it with that little money. And I told him, well, someday you're going to work for me. And Bob joined us in 1998. So never say never, okay, because something will happen and change things for you. So anyway, and I started a company in November of 78. We developed, just did testing, and I began at that point developing some products. In about 85, 86, I started looking at designing our own products, because by that time we built enough of a nest egg that we could start investing in products. And we started doing CMOS type products. and that's back in 85, 86. So anyway, and now just to kind of get a little bit of a background about me and my desire to have my own company, and really it was not built on a product line like Maxim and LTC both had product lines when they left Intersil and National respectively. They took a whole product group, and they took the engineers, they took the products, and they went and just started their own company. That wasn't my case. My case was I started as a test services company doing semiconductor services, and then after I had the money and the ability, then we started developing our own products. So let's see, maybe I'm not moving my slides here. Oh, the green one. Oh, okay. Wow. Again, I have a vision problem too, so that's okay. Here we are. So I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about the industry and kind of what we've been going through. So you can see this slide starts out in the late 90s or early 90s, and then we went through this growth period. By the way, this line here is the unit growth. I think it's blue, I think, in this color. And then the red is revenue. Pardon me? Get the opposite? No. Oh. Okay, it's revenue there. Okay. And this is just a variation. I guess it's cyclical. Okay. So you can see the industry has been growing relatively uniformly. We hit this dot-com bubble here, and you can see that we got a tremendous drop in revenue, and then we came out of it in about 18 months, and then the industry continued on until we hit 2009, and then we took a big dip again, and then now we've kind of plateaued. And I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. So, but what's interesting is that the industry has been an upward slope since inception. So just to give you a perspective on this, in the early 60s, the semiconductor industry was primarily military. So about 70 to 80% of the revenue came from military. And it wasn't until the late 70s going into the early 80s that we saw a switch where the revenue then went more to the commercial, more like for PCs and that sort of thing. So the industry's growth, even though it's been a continued upward slope, has been pretty much on the same asymptote as far as growth rate, roughly around 10%. But we're going mainly from a military company, military industry to more of a consumer industrial type business. So, and in this time frame, let's see, in this time frame here, roughly 60+% of the revenue came from North America and Europe. But after this, after the dot-com implosion, then we began a shift, and the shift began in earnest, meaning that the company started moving to Asia, and we ended up outsourcing a lot of our technology, and a lot of companies became fabless. Because back in the early times there, before the 80s, everybody had their own fabs. But after the dot-com explosion, with the moving from U.S. to Asia, now what we have is 60 to 70% of revenue comes from Asia, and now it's only 30-35% comes from the U.S. and Europe. Even though the U.S. really dominates as far as the use of semiconductors, we don't actually make them here, whether the revenue doesn't come from the U.S. So Then of course, we hit this mess in here with that financial crisis, and the industry nosed over, and as a consequence, we went into a hole. We had to come out of it. It took another about 18 months, 16 months to come out of it, and then we, because, and I'm going to cover that with you in a minute. So what's happening is that when the U.S., because the U.S. is such a dominant consumer of electronics, that we really drive the rest of the world. So 75% of the effect on the semiconductor industry comes from the U.S. And so when the U.S. GDP is above 5%, then the growth rate for our industry is around 10. So we get about a doubling effect when the GDP goes above 5%. However, if the GDP, U.S. GDP again, drops below 4%, then we just track GDP. And so that's what's been happening to us. That's, whoops, my slide's gone, but if you remember that curve, that's what's happened to us. Why we're rolled over is because of that. And another thing that's happened is as a consequence of the low interest rates, that's allowed these companies to then to go out and raise lots of money and then go in this consolidation mania that we have seen. So I want to talk about another phenomenon that's taking place. Back in early times, this is, by the way, this graph shows the industry's growth rate, revenue, and sales, and then this is the R&D expenditure as a percent of sales. Because most of you are engineers in this room tonight, I thought this would be an interesting slide for you because it shows what's happening to GDP, as R&D as it relates to revenue. So what do you notice here? It's skyrocketing. So R&D as a percent of revenue is increasing at a dramatic rate. Any thoughts as to what that is? Why is R&D increasing so dramatically as a percent of revenue? They're more complex products. How about product life? Shorter. So back in this time, the product lives were north of 10 years. You get over into this time frame, and you can see what's happening is the industry wants to grow, and because the products have become more complex, this is a big hole here, right? You can see that we're spending a lot more money, but we're not getting the growth as a consequence of it. And so as a result of that, the op margins for, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, have been suffering because we've been putting so much into R&D. But now look what's happening. It's gone up to a point where it's becoming asymptotic again to flattening out with regard to revenue. So, but up in here, what's happening is that you have a lot more expenditure on software because the circuits are becoming more complex and require more integration, and they're requiring a software environment to operate. So most of you in here who are involved in semiconductors know that almost all the circuits now have some software attribute associated with them. So now I want to tell you a little about the effect of that. So if we look at gross margin, and all of you should know what gross margin is because that's what the money we make after the cost of the product. It's been running around 50 to 60% is what the kind of the average gross margin in the industry. So if you look at then the op expense, you have R&D, you have SG&A. SG&A is selling and general and administrative expense, and then the delta of that is the op margin. So op margins have been suffering. because of the high level of R&D. SG&A has remained somewhat constant. So I know there's a little bit business associated with this slide, but I thought you'd appreciate it because it helps you understand the impact that R&D is having on op margins. This has stayed about the same, but this cost has gone up, reducing op margins. As a consequence, the street has been demanding higher op margins, Wall Street that is, and if you can't get gross margin up, and the problem with increasing gross margin is you have to remain competitive. And so we're now a worldwide industry, and they're demanding lower prices, which affects our gross margin. So you have these companies out there that are saying, well, you know, you're going to have to cut back R&D, but you're cutting off your nose to spite your face because R&D is what's funding the development of our technology. So they're saying, oh, let's shut down our fabs because then we won't have the process development costs associated with R&D, and that's just adding, spreading more and more of the technology outside of the U.S. because it's so expensive to manufacture here, and I'll talk about that right now. Well, because again, we're hitting the limit because the more that we're spending on, on R&D, this reduces this value here, and since your stock is a function of your op margins or your profit, so your stock price is a attribute or a multiple of your op margins, of your profit. So So to control our R&D, R&D also includes process development, which is what you guys are involved in. And process development now has been, fabs are being shut down here. They're putting more of the R&D into less expensive, the process R&D in a way, into less expensive areas. You have, companies like China that are literally going to build all their own circuits in China, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But anyway, the R&D cost is really what's prompting these companies to sell off these fabs and to move their facilities offshore, much like we did in the early days when we did assembly here. We used to assemble our own parts here in the U.S. But because of the cost, we moved that offshore, and now we're moving fab offshore. So most of you will note that it doesn't take much to start a semiconductor company if you use an outside foundry, because you can use shuttles, you can use other ways of cutting your costs. So you can have two engineers, an Irish setter and a PC, and you can call yourself a semiconductor company. When I started in 78, there were less than 200 semiconductor companies. Now there are over 1,400. And most of those are fabless. Over 1,000, more than 1,000 of those semiconductor companies are fabless semiconductor companies, and very small, 1 to 2 man operations. But they still call themselves a semiconductor company. That would never have happened back in my time, because it took a huge company to be able to fund having a fab. So this site, where are we now? Should drop them all in. Okay. So where are we now? What's the status of our industry? Well, we're seeing a lot more consolidation that's going on. The manufacturing is very expensive here in the U.S. The California wine industry is now larger than the U.S. semiconductor industry. That just gives you a sense of the size of it. We have no political clout. I was talking to one of the senators a few years ago and asked him why the government wasn't taking more concern or cognizance of our industry. And he says, because you guys are nothing. I said, well, we're not nothing. I mean, without semiconductors, you wouldn't have all the electronic devices you have today. And he says, go tell that to this senator and that senator. We just have no political clout. I know that we formed these various institutions like SEMI and so forth to try to bolster our relationship with Congress, but it hasn't worked. As you know, many companies now have moved even their corporations offshore just to save taxes, and you know what that does. If you now have moved your company offshore and you're no longer paying taxes in the U.S., that even reduces our political clout even more. So we're in a descending spiral. In other words, we're doing everything wrong. We're sending out our manufacturing to other countries. We've now enabled almost every country in the world, including North Korea, to make semiconductors. We don't pay any taxes in the U.S., and this is really hurting our industry. So a lot of it is coming back to roost, brought on by our own demise, as you would, bring our own demise. And of course, consolidation is another thing that is expanding at a very rapid rate. My company was consumed last August by Microchip. I didn't want that to happen, but the investors were pushing for it, and we ended up having to do something I didn't want to do. But that's just kind of the industry situation. So I was asked to talk about my crystal ball, kind of what do I see things going, and kind of what's going to happen now to our industry going forward. So this is my view, and you can take it for what it's worth, but this is the situation we find ourselves in. It's up to you guys to make things happen, to change the outcome of this industry. We're going to have to get in somehow and restructure our political clout in this country. We may have to consider paying taxes, which I know your managers don't want, or your executives don't want to do. But Micrel was a U.S. company since 1978. When we were sold and acquired in August of 2015, we were paying 35% tax rate. We paid every single year our taxes. But I'm one voice crying in the wilderness. And other companies are not doing that. They're sheltering their taxes offshore. So we're kind of bringing this problem onto ourselves. So what can we do now as a consequence of where we are to change that? We're going to either have to develop better technology that we will not outsource, that we will not push offshore, and I hope I'm talking to the right group here. You're going to have to retain the technology here in this country. There is technology that we can develop that we can keep here if we will do it, but it's up to you guys. I was talking to an employee who used to work for me just a couple of days ago, and he's discouraged. He says that he thinks his job is, he's a process development technologist, and he thinks his job is gone. I mean, he says that we're not doing any technology development here in the United States anymore. And I know some of you are, but you're small. When you look at the industry, you're a small group relative to the rest of the world. But you have the ability, you have the know-how, if you will put your heart to it, to develop these new technologies. I was talking to my son who works at TI, and I understand that TI is working on advanced technologies that will hopefully give some leverage and some edge to the products that are made here at TI. I can't speak for the rest of the industry, but I know that if we don't do something and do something quick, our industry is doomed, at least in the U.S. So unless you are willing to move outside the the U.S. and other countries, you're going to have to do something. And hopefully I'm talking to the right group when I say that. That's one of the charters I was given tonight, was to inspire some of you to become creative. I was hoping to fill this room, and I'm going to expect you now to leave and pass the word as you go back to your respective companies that we got to do something. Talk to your executives, talk to your cohorts, and say we got to do something if we want to keep this industry vibrant and alive in the U.S. Now, I was also asked to talk a little bit about being inventive and thinking outside the box. And so one of the stories I will tell with respect to that is my development of the wafer stepper back in 1975. In order to invent something, you have to think outside the box. You've got to think beyond conventional wisdom. Now, everybody in this room knows what a wafer stepper is. But back in the early 70s, it was considered the dumbest idea ever foisted on mankind. And I was ridiculed for it. They laughed at me as though I was some kind of a nincompoop. They said it's not viable. And the reason it wasn't, they said it wasn't viable, was because it was slow. I mean, I'll admit that the throughput, if you look at back in the day, the number of alignments per shift that we could get were about 750 alignments per shift using a projection aligner. But the wafer stepper could only do 10 alignments per shift back in those days. Also, the technology, or the wafer size, was around 4-inch, and to make the stepper of any value, we had to get to at least 6-inch as a minimum. But back in that time, we're on 4. And also lithography, we were at 1.5 microns, and the stepper was capable of one wavelength of light, 435 nanometer. And they said no one's ever going to need anything below a micron, because we had other issues, thin film problems. We had, just barely had gotten into implant technology, and so they were thinking in terms of the limitations of today. They weren't looking out into the future. So the way the wafer stepper came into being, it's a kind of an interesting story because it involves TI. My boss wanted me to sell some equipment to TI, but TI didn't want our photomask equipment. And so I said, well, I don't know if any of you remember a gentleman, Dr. Pei Wang and Dr. Bill Alman at TI, but they were the ones that I had to convince. So I went in there the first time, and they asked me to leave. This was down in Dallas, and I said, why? They said, because we were told you're not welcome. So I left. My boss said, no, you're going to go back again. I said, but they told me not to come back. And he said, well, you're going to go back anyway. So I went back, and I was dressed in a nice suit, and I went in there, and I told him I wanted to see Dr. Alman, and this time 2 security guards came and grabbed me by the arms, took me out the door, but didn't let me walk out down the steps. For those of you who know that building, they actually threw me down. I tore my pants, and I said, how rude. And that's TI for you, David. What do you think of the company you work for? Anyway, they threw me out of there. I tore my pants, told my boss, I'm not going back. And he says, you have to go back. A good sales guy doesn't give up. So my third time I go, and I'm thinking, well, I have to come up with some unique way of getting my foot in the door. I've been thinking about the stepper as an idea because in those days we were using contact prints, and I thought that introduced to me defects as you got the diode getting bigger and the line widths were getting narrower. Defects became a real issue for processing semiconductors. So I said, what if we just projected from the reticle onto the wafer and using a stepper. So we'd use the 5x reduction, and we would step the die with the one pass, no defects, you know. Anyway, I said, well, I'm not going to get a chance to introduce that because I'm not welcome here at TI. So I went up to the receptionist and I said, I'd like to talk to Bill Alman, and the receptionist said, who may I say is calling? I said, well, tell him his brother's here. So I sat down in the lounge chair. Pretty soon, down the stairs came Bill Alman. He walked over to the receptionist and said, no, where's my brother, you know? And she pointed over to me and sitting on the couch. I grinned. And so he came over to me and he was just red, flush red, angry. He said, how dare you tell her that you're my brother? I said, aren't we all brothers and sisters under God, you know? So he cracked up. He laughed, took me by the shoulder, arm, took me up to his office, and that's when I introduced the wafer stepper. So TI bought 4. By the way, my company, Electron Devices, did not even know that I had even introduced the concept of a wafer stepper. That's why I lost my job at TI. But I drew on the board this concept of the stepper to them, and they gave me a purchase order for 4 systems at $800,000 apiece. That's the largest single purchase order ever given to a single company for semiconductor equipment. And I got that in 1975 from TI. And thank you, TI, for that nice order. The problem is it got me fired. But and the reason was because my company didn't know about it, and so, but I already had a PO, and so they felt obligated to meet that purchase order, and so we did design the industry's first wafer stepper. And that's today the wafer stepper is probably the most predominant piece of equipment that we have in manufacturing semiconductors. I don't think we'd be where we are today in technology without the wafer stepper. So I'm very proud of that. That's one of my things that I've accomplished in this industry that I can take to my next life, that I was able to help and contribute in some way to development of this great piece of equipment. But that's what you need to do. That's where you come in right now, is you have to come up with the next wafer stepper idea. We are now looking to you to be the next innovators and creators of the technology that's needed in this industry. So the book that I wrote that Prasad has a copy of, but he's more than happy to show you because I didn't bring mine. It's called Tough Things First. I was asked to write this book since 1984. People have been asking me to write the story of Micrel, also of my knowledge of the industry, and I did do that in a book called Tough Things First. It's available on Amazon or any of the other book companies that you like. It's on ebook and on Kindle. So it's really a book about the industry, about how I did what I did in the industry over the 50-something years that I was in the industry. You are part of a great industry. I love it. I'm still attached to it. And if you ask my son, I still ask questions about how things are going in the industry just to keep up to speed. I think I'll always have my heart with the semiconductor industry. And doing the tough things first is really learning to love the things you hate. And so discipline is doing what you don't like doing and doing it well, and that's really what the book is about, is learning to love the things you don't like doing. And that's the whole concept of how this industry has done what it's done, is by doing things we really don't like doing and learning to love them at the same time. And that's the concept of my book, Tough Things First. If you can do that, if you can learn to love the things you hate, then I think that this industry has got its future well in hand. So, but you are the future of the industry. And I leave that with you as my solemn witness that if this industry is survived, the people that are in this room are the ones that are going to be to make it happen. So with that, I can turn it over to some Q&A if we have any time left. Thank you.
If any company outside Germany that does not belong to Germany or German companies, if they copy a patent, that company from Germany, they go with a lawsuit so bad that that company cannot move. However, here we have a president that signs out tons of patents to China. And Germany actually protects their labor. If it's designed, if it's invented, and it's going to stay here. I'm not going to let it go to somebody else unless I'm going to be able to protect my employees or my workers or my scientists. That's number one. Number two is over here, if a company across the street gives 1 penny more than what you're earning here, the guy just jumps the ship. And there's a lot of backstabbing going on, and that also increases that desire to move on, go to another one. As a result, the salary goes up. As a result, companies find out, well, I think I'm going to go overseas. And they're going to be spinning their wheel for a while till they really educate those engineers to the American standards and get something out of it. That's my idea.
Okay. Well, I mentioned that in my presentation that we have to do something, and you know it's going to be up to you guys to do that. So we need the political clout to make it happen. Will it happen? I don't know. That's my crystal ball probably says no, just because we haven't been able to get much in the way of inroads. Our companies are too willing to go out and spread the technology around the world, and they don't pay taxes here. That's the other problem. And if you don't pay taxes, you're not going to get any political clout. In Germany, you have to pay taxes. You can't run offshore with a German company. Yes?
I got a question. Actually, with my generation, globalization is a given. I have talked with my colleagues about the similar topic. To me, semiconductor today is like the automobile business in the 80s and 90s. U.S. used to be big, but you cannot sustain the competition from other places like Japanese cars. You have to realize that's something given, not something already happened, and you can ride with it. For example, U.S. auto company may not be competing with German company, may not be competing with Japanese company, but with a new wave, new technology like electric cars, we still ride on the new technology in the front line. That gives us the next generation of place where you can profit from your technology advancement. You cannot just holding on to it. There's nothing you can hold on. Technology, globalization is happening already there. Nobody, even the U.S. president, anybody in the world, you cannot stop it. And stop it is just go backwards. It doesn't happen. It will not benefit. Nobody will benefit from it. It really was in my mind, what's going to be happen is that you always leading the way. You're always one generation ahead of somebody else. You build up your technology barrier. You build up your financial, economic barrier. That's where you advance, and that's where profit came from. It's not from building a wall. It's going to be, you'll be the first one, you're leading that. Like what happened to today's electrical cars. That's where the technology development, that's where the profits came from. And what the reasons will be looking forward, as you just mentioned many times in your presentation. That's my perspective.
Well, with the reverse engineering tools that are available now, they can reverse engineer even the process within a matter of weeks. So you have to find some other way to protect your technology rather than just being the first. You have to be able to keep it from being pilfered. Kentucky Fried Chicken has been able to keep their coating protected for hundreds of years, okay? And we can't seem to keep our technology secret for a month. But, we have to find a way to protect our technology, and that's the reason I came tonight to talk to the IEEE, is because you guys are the ones that are going to have to help us protect that technology in some way. I don't have the answer. I'm just saying you've got to find a way to protect the technology, or it is going to get filtered by every country in the world.
Ray, a good perspective you gave for the semiconductor. Whenever any technology gets matured, like 50 years, steel industry before, automobile, semiconductor, they have a tendency to go in the low-cost area. So this is a natural progression. The question is that if semiconductor is gone, why not we put our new generation into the other type of innovation like Facebook, Google, Nest? They generate revenue too. So why we after the semiconductor, which is so mature, let it go, develop some others?
Well, you can do that if you want, but there's a lot of you here work for the semiconductor industry, and I'm sure you'd like to see it continue rather than moving into Facebook or Google or Twitter. So I don't know, how many are ready to move to the software? I don't think they're going to move.
The question about
You have to speak up, please.
yeah. Can you hear me?
Barely.
Yeah. The tough things first. That's actually that what we have been learned or what we have practiced is that if you have 5 things to do the easier one first. So at least you can say that 2 out of 5 is knocked out and done. But if you get stuck, it's like
I couldn't hear him.
It's like an exam strategy and in the real world strategy. If you have 5 things, you start with the simplest one and the easiest one. So at least 2 of the 5 things is done. But if you start with the toughest thing and then you get stuck and you can never get done 1 out of 5. So that's I'm perplexed by you saying that tough things first.
Okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do the tough things first. What we got ahead of us is not easy. If you want this industry to survive in the U.S. and in Silicon Valley, you're going to have to change some of the things you're doing.
I guess for the tough things first, I mean, the world pays you for differentiation. And if you're always doing the easy things, why does the world want to pay you for that? So you may not succeed on the tough things, but on the other hand, the world is looking for something that differentiates. And usually what differentiates from the world is something that's a little bit tougher.
Pardon me? Tough things, yeah. I'm 100%. But they do keep it a secret. I mean, how does Kentucky Fried Chicken keep their recipe a secret? Okay, and that should be simple for people to crack, but they're still able to do it. And they don't make the Kentucky Fried Chicken in China; they make it here.
How much greed is playing in all this role of technology transfer? I don't know. I'm just
how much
greed people,
greed?
If they're moving offshore, how much greed? Because the human nature, they want to have more money, like tax evasion and so many things. So, what do you think about the greed? Is greed playing any role? All this?
Well, we need to develop some anti-greed pills. Maybe we should work on that. I don't know how we're going to stop greed from surviving. Silicon Valley was built on greed.
So let's thank Ray for a very nice talk to the IEEE Electron
Thank you.
Society. Thank you very much, Ray. It was a pleasure having you here.
It's been an honor to be here, to be able to talk to the IEEE. I never thought I could do that. So here I am.
I'd like to think that TI was the one that inspired you to create the wafer stepper.
They did.
It was a test. We knew that if we gave you a hard time, you'd come with your wafer stepper.
No, TI did inspire me to do the wafer stepper. Honestly, that's true. I will not deny it.
So were we the first company in the world to use a wafer stepper?
You were the first company to use a wafer stepper.
That's very nice to know.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. TI has been at the forefront of a lot, and I know not a lot of you work for TI, but TI has been at the forefront of a lot of technology development. Went from germanium to silicon. Now you're, gallium nitride, maybe silicon carbide. I mean, you guys are almost in every technology that I think that we use today has been developed here at Texas Instruments.
Yeah, it is very exciting to work here, actually. I mean, we
just
announced that we have a qualified 600-volt gallium nitride process.
Whoa. Is that a secret?
Not anymore.
Anymore, no. Well, we're doing advertising for TI today because they shared this room with us. Let us use this room. Go buy my book. Help me out.
Well,
in what way? Well, you know, IBM had the smallest. I mean, it's 7 nanometers. So, and IBM is selling out. They're shutting their fabs down. So, I'm not sure that just going to a smaller geometry has helped TI. I mean, helped IBM. You know, Intel. When you have 80% of the microprocessor business, you know, you become kind of the big gorilla. And so, you know, but not all of us here are big gorillas. If you look at TI or Intel's data book, it's smaller than Micrel's. I mean, they had fewer products than we had. By the way, if you look at the cost of a Z80, or no, the 8080, I'm sorry, microprocessor. You remember that? Do you guys remember the 8080?
Yeah.
Okay, so the 8080 came out in about 1980, and it sold the 8080 sold for the same price as now the i7 sells for today, and yet we're talking about tens of millions more transistors in the i7 than there is in the 8080. So, you know, so have any of you heard about Moore's law? Okay, what is Moore's law? What? No, feature size. Right. Okay, but that's not Moore's law. You guys are spelling it wrong. It's M-O-R-E-S. You get more for less. That's Moore's law. That's not Gordon Moore. It's Moore's law. Zinn's Moore's law is we give people more for less. That's Moore's law. Zinn's Moore's law.
Thank you. So feel free to grab some trail mix from the back and come on by. Ray's going to be here for a few more minutes.
Yes, he was asking us.
Oh, you got one more comment. Go ahead. So IBM is very good in technology, but not so good in production.
Well, I don't want to denigrate IBM. They're a great company. They've developed a lot of technology that we benefit from today, and I don't know that their production sucks. I think maybe their management doesn't understand how to get the lowest cost, but I don't think that their production sucks. But, I mean, you can't do 7 nanometer if your production sucks.
I agree. Well, come on by, and Ray will be here for a bit more time if you want to chat with Ray.
Teach you how to love. Yeah.